What are the three tiers of this model?
Cool. Okay, so there's 12 stages, and we divide them up into three tiers. The first tier is essentially the history of the world. It's all the stages of consciousness that you're seeing generally throughout the world. They are generally ideological worldviews. Each one of them kind of comes with a preset categorical notions about how the world is and how it behaves. And each one of them develops a more sophisticated comprehension of all those things just by being exposed to more and more people who are coming from that altitude, or literature from that altitude, or just being simply exposed to that altitude. The distinctive feature of the first tier altitudes is that they only tend to like themselves. They tend to dislike the altitude right before them. They tend to dislike the altitude right after them and find it incomprehensible. So the altitude after you is generally incomprehensible. The altitude prior to the one you're at is reprehensible because, of course, it is a former part of your psychology that you identified with. So now it has become villainous in your transcending of it, and you're getting out of it. You've escaped from it. Now it's the villain. And that's the way that each of these work as you go. So at the first tier, you tend to only like your own meme, and you tend to distance yourself and not get engaged with the other memes. And thus, the first tier generates the conflict that we experience as the conflict in the world, as the problem that we all can't just get along. We have fundamental different concepts of reality. We comprehend reality on different terms, and we are not compatible. That's the first tier. So to maximize compatibility, we start with the second tier. Teal and turquoise are the second tier, and what teal and turquoise mean is that you are compatible with the first tier. You see those patterns, you understand what they are, there are no surprises in them, and your goal is to work with them, to keep them healthy, to make them work together, because you recognize that you are the only person who is seeing these patterns. So you are the only person who can work with them. It's terrifying. It sucks, because these guys literally, it is not a teal or turquoise person who is dropping bombs or has nuclear codes. These are orange and amber and red human beings that have these capabilities that we've entrusted them with. So the world becomes kind of scary when you realize that it is governed and all the power is residing in the hands of according to our model of consciousness, these are children. These are not fully mature adults that are running our world. And so that creates this sort of urgency, this desire to get people up to the second tier, which is a problem. You can't do it that way. You're not moving anyone. It doesn't work that way. So once you recognize it, you kind of get pulled in the wrong direction, which is to change everybody to get them up to the second tier. No, as the second tier, you're working with the first tier. You're not trying to get them to change. You're trying to get them to function in a greater system. Okay, so that's the second tier. And then the third tier, which is more debatable, more nebulous. The second tier is a very new emergent, but it's pretty well established that people do develop in this direction of the second tier. The third tier is a horse of another color. This is presumed to be the top four stages of consciousness, simply because it is known that consciousness can develop in these directions, and that it operates by the same mechanic of questioning the prior dialectic and finding a new synthesis. So the third tier, indigo, violet, ultraviolet, and clear light, are sort of speculated that the future will yield these stages of consciousness, not that they are all over around today like the first and second tier, but that these are potential future emergences, because at least some individuals have displayed these capacities of consciousness, and thus they are available as stages. Whether those are like these stages, that's sort of an argument that is made in this model, and there isn't really a counter argument. There's just nothing really like it. But the third tier does go into transcendence. It goes into recognizing the constructed nature of your very self, the constructed nature of your reality, your presumptions about reality, and it is to see reality more directly in the present moment by training yourself to view the world through a more trained and more articulate and more subtle version of conscious awareness itself. So in the third tier, we're not only taking control of our identity and the knowledge that we are acquiring and accessing, we are now taking control of consciousness itself. We're making that an object that we're playing around with. We're trying to access the best state of consciousness that we can possibly be in for the greatest comprehension of reality. This pulls us in the direction of a form of mysticism, a form of meditation, a form of contemplation. And the third tier will require a great deal of unpacking and elaboration, but I wanted to prepare you in advance that the clear light, like the infrared, both are in a sense a unity consciousness. The infrared has not been differentiated into the quadrants yet, into different perspectives. It's a unity itself. The clear light is self-aware of the quadrants, self-aware of these stages, and it is capable of suspending that, and the ultraviolet and the clear light are a suspension of all ideation, all altitudes. And so, in a way, it is very similar to the infrared in that it is pure consciousness without ideological content. So that would, in a sense, according to this model and just kind of logically, if there is a such thing as pure consciousness without object, and that is your true nature, as the enlightened monk would have you believe, then indeed that would be some sort of final stage of consciousness that you could access, would be to have total control and total isolation of what consciousness is. And so, it being the case that that is a very difficult state or stage, either way, of consciousness to access, we're in the position that we find ourselves at one of these altitudes, and we have to take somebody's word for it unless we are going to go to these stages or states ourselves. So for this reason, I tend to talk about the third tier separately from the rest of the model. Like the first and second tier are great for talking about like politics and world events and people and stuff like that. But the third tier is useful predominantly for talking about spirituality and religion and consciousness. And they are predominantly useful to differentiate the difference between third tier consciousness, which is a matter of a direct experience of a state of awareness or a stage of awareness, versus other forms of religion and spirituality arising from magenta, red, amber, orange, green, first tier expressions of spirituality and religion, which do not pertain to states of transcendent consciousness, but instead rely heavily upon symbolism and metaphor for those different things.